You're listening to Genuine Chit-Chat. This show is for real.
Hello there guys and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week is a very movie-orientated podcast where I am joined by the all-powerful JAC. Now, JAC is a blogger, teacher, podcaster, and a film buff. He is involved with the Comics in Motion family quite a lot, doing Pop Gorillas, Season's Greetings, and also soon to be some more indie comic spotlight stuff, as well as popping up here and there and a few other things, as well as the second edition of the Comics in Motion book club that will be out soon. And this is just a really big movie conversation, really. I mean, the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so, me and JAC talk about how he got involved with Comics in Motion in his podcasting origin story. And then after that, we talk about lots of different movies, superhero movies, how his day job being a film studies teacher affects his enjoyment of movies, and then we also talk about our favourite directors and also what makes a film a cult classic. So that's just generally what we talk about in this episode. In part 2, the conversation does continue, but that won't be out till next week. But if you're desperate to hear it and you want to support the show for as little as £1 a month, you get access to the full unsplit episode that is over 2 hours long. So if you've got a little bit of money to spare, you want to show some support to the show financially, go over to patreon.com/genuinechitchat and you will get access to this as well as several other Genuine Chit-Chat episodes that are full when they've been split into part 1 and part 2, as well as loads of other extra things such as mine and Megan's Afterthoughts shows. So links to that are in the description. Make sure you check that out. Aside from that, guys, there's not much else to say. I don't want to ramble on here too much, but I will say that there is going to be a promo by Spider Dan and the Secret Boars that's going to be coming up in a moment, and I've got a link to his website in the description where you can find all his contact information, social media, all that sort of other jazz as well. So make sure you check out his stuff because it is brilliant. So really, guys, aside from telling you to look in the description for all the other links and whatnot that you can expect in a usual episode, I hope you enjoy the show, and I'll be back to talk about what's coming up in part 2 and what you can expect from Genuine Chit-Chat over the coming weeks. So without further ado, here is Spider Dan's promo and then my conversation with JAC.
Hello, Spider Dan here of the Spider Dan and the Secret Boars podcast. Just wanted to give you a quick introduction on what I do and why you should check it out. My main mission for the podcast is to spotlight the best kept secrets in entertainment that a mainstream audience may find boring. I cover these topics in various different formats, including Secret Defenders, where I challenge my guests to defend their favourite films that are underrated, obscure or infamous, or Clone Boars, where we compare similar pieces of media and see which one will be crowned the victor, and Secret Boar Stories, where we compile a top 5 list in high fidelity fashion. I have various guests from all walks of life, including friends, family, comic book professionals and actors, while also doing the odd solo podcast and Patreon YouTube video here and there. If you like entertaining and informative discussions and are sick of content creators covering the same old MCU and Netflix programming, take a walk on the wild and the weird side by joining the Prattalion. Swing over to SpiderDanandTheSecretBoars.com for all the information you may need, such as links to the podcast, social media accounts, and how you can support the podcast. That's SpiderDanandTheSecretBoars.com. That's BORES. Thanks for joining me, and as always, prepare for prattle.
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. And here we are for another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. I don't think I've said that at the start of a show in a long time. That's weird to say because I normally waffle on in the intro about those sort of things. But I am here with JAC, who we have yet to podcast together, which we've now done, which is amazing. And I think we've got a few lined up in the future as well, which is going to be fun. And I'm sure there'll be many, many more. So welcome to the podcast, JAC. Why don't you tell people vaguely or how we got connected, I suppose, would be a good place to start.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I think once this world starts, as you say, it's the first one. The walls crumble, don't they? And that's it. Suddenly, we can't get rid of each other. I think
that's definitely what I'm like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds terrible. I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
Just because the crew that I've now been pulled into are just such a bunch of wonderful, lovely guys, and including yourself, who are just. It's that corner of the internet. You hear so much about the internet and how it's a terrible place and it's full of negativity, but not if you stick to the right bits. And this group of people really are what the internet should be, just a bunch of positive people who just want to talk and have discourse. Sometimes we disagree, but in a mature way. But mostly we're here to support each other, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's why it's one of those things with the Comics in Motion family and things. It's just like, I haven't had everyone on my podcast yet, but I think I have, apart from Aussie Steve, I think I've been at least in a podcast with someone else, either hosting or otherwise in some sort of fashion. And I'm slowly making it way around. It's just for my listeners who aren't necessarily into, like, for the people who like Comics in Motion, it's amazing because it's like, oh man, they're doing all these collaborations. And obviously we've got Paul's show, Geek, on the Fantastic Universes podcast, which you and I have both been on separately. And it's just like, there's all these cool things, but it's like on my listener feed, it's like, okay, I've had someone from Comics in Motion. I have to have a gap for a while.
Yeah, fair enough.
Not because, I've got the Star Wars show and I've got various things on Comics in Motion as well as Genuine Chit-Chat, and it's like, I don't want to just merge it all into one for Genuine Chit-Chat, because it's very tempting to just to release only Star Wars and nerdy stuff, but there's a few occasional things where it's like, nope, try and get another musician on or something.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this show though, isn't it, is that you can have that complete random, and that is a little corner. Comics in Motion, I'm pleased you said that. I should have said what the group is. That's a little corner for that, isn't it? That's not what this show is about. This show is about all these different voices. That's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. So with podcasting then, let's start with, obviously, you're involved with you're the host. I'll let you explain it. You're involved with 2 podcasts primarily. Why didn't you talk about each of them?
Yeah, sure. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, as I think a lot of people do now. And then I came across Comics in Motion, I think, just randomly. And I listened to a few indie comic spotlights, Tony's show, and I listened to a few of Max's Mandatory Marvel, because that's kind of my world into it, is reading comics. So I just started sending some tweets up saying, I've been listening to these guys, I really like them. And then at that point I was also rewatching Firefly. So with my partner, we take it in turns. So we do like a he picks, she picks, when we watch through a whole series.
Oh, we do the same thing. I will clarify, I haven't seen Firefly, annoyingly. It's on the very close to, like, very soon list. I think Invincible's just ahead of that at the moment. So I still haven't watched that, but I totally know what you mean.
Maybe we can help bump it up when I get, because Tony and I are getting there fairly soon.
Well, that's why I wanted to try and push it through, because it's only short as well. It's only like is it one season or is it 2?
1 season, 14 episodes. That's it. Yeah.
Sadly enough, I've heard. And the movie Serenity, I think, is the sequel-y sort of thing, isn't it?
I think we'll talk about that as well, when we get there. So I'd sent these things out, and I was watching Firefly, so I was tweeting a lot about Firefly, because, let's tweet about Firefly, because Firefly is awesome. So Tony cottoned on to both these things and put them both together. So just came at me really and just said, do you want to come on and talk about some Firefly comics? Luckily, my fandom had taken me to the point where I had actually read those. And that was my first appearance. So I sort of leapt at the chance really to do that. I've never gone back and listened to it. I listened to it when it first came out, but now I feel like I'm a bit more experienced. We're nearly a year now past that point. It's a bit cringy. I think I'll just pretend that's amazing, that the content of that episode. But so I went on with Tony, and that went well enough that we stayed in contact and just kept talking. I think Tony's that kind of guy as well, that he just wants to, if he meets somebody he has a kinship with, he wants to, keep a relationship. So we were chatting and talking about other things we could go on together. And then Max got in touch as well and invited me on his show too. And then it just kind of spiraled from there. And then on January of this year, Tony got in touch with me and just said, let's do something together. I know you love Buffy. I love Buffy. Shall we rewatch it all and record a show about it? And he'd already spoken to Dave, who I know, I think you coined the term Podfather, I think, maybe.
Well, I didn't coin it officially. I coined it for Dave. I think I was the first person in Comics in Motion to call him that, but it's a term that's thrown around the podmosphere a lot, so I can't. I wish I could take the credit for that amazing thing, but no, I'm afraid not.
But within our circles, we'll give you the ownership of that. So he'd already kind of okayed the idea. So really, it was just we got on with watching and then collaborating, and then more and more things have come from that. So we do the season's greetings, as we've come to call it, because we were just going to do Buffy, but we were really enjoying it. And we then thought, well, let's go on to Angel, and then let's go on and do Firefly. We'll cover off all kind of the Whedon shows that we want to do. And then we've now got a shared Word document that's just got God knows how many TV shows that we're thinking about doing for as long as we can keep it going. So we rebranded from Binging Buffy to Season's Greetings. And that's been really good fun. And I feel like I've been on a massive learning curve of how to talk, strangely, but in this realm, and then how to kind of co-host. For a long time, I felt like a guest But I think now we've kind of evened out where like Tony is the lead because he's so good at doing that. But I think our voices have become fairly equal now in the show. So from there, I decided to go on, and when the Nevers came out, which was kind of Victoria and Buffy, I thought, what a better chance to step up and do something for myself. So yeah, I took the lead on that and covered the 6 episodes week by week, because I know that's something else within the network, Comics in Motion Network, people do. I know you did for the Star Wars, didn't you? For the for Mandalorian you did, didn't you?
We did it for Mandalorian, and then I was involved, me and my friend Tonya, we did 2 episodes on Loki, but I know what's the topic, we're doing it as well. It's kind of an amalgamation, like different people talk about it in sort of different ways. It sort of depends. Bad Batch is finished now. I keep thinking I should probably do another episode of that with Megan and Dave, but the thing is, it's just me and Dave especially. I think Dave is arguably him and Steve, I think, are the 2 busiest people of the group. Me and Tony are pretty even when it comes to busyness, specifically with podcasting, but Steve is involved with 3 or 4 podcasts or something, and then Dave, like 2 main ones, which is 2 Best for Dummies, and I think I Am the Knight, which is the Batman animated series show he does with his son Adam Ray. With him and Dave and Chris, because Dave and Chris have got, VHS Strikes Back, and also Chris and Dave's reality cast, and then they're involved with Back to the Office. So it's just like, I'm quite busy, and Dave is probably one of the only other people, he's even more busy than I am, and it's like, I want to do it with him, but equally it's just like finding the time. And then we've got the book club coming up as well, and everything else, being able to read all these things rather than podcasting every single day, which would be the dream.
It would be. I mean, my partner takes the mick at me because I've got lists for everything. I've got lists for, like films I want to watch, films from, I do it, I'm a bit geeky, but aren't we all? So I do it like year by year of like what's coming up. Then I need a list of like what's on my read list, because I can't keep it all straight in my head.
I've got the exact same. I've got a little notepad by my bed, which is comics that I have to get through. I've got a list on my phone, which is films coming out in the cinema this year and the dates they're coming out. I've got one notebook, which has got stuff for Patreon and also guests for Genuine Chit-Chat. I've got one notebook, which is notes for one thing, another. I've got lists everywhere. So I am 100% in the same boat as you.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. But I mean, I don't know how those guys do it, because I struggle to keep up with everything I want to watch and read and do. And the 6 weeks of doing the Nevers, that was just one show a week with, I suppose, a season's greetings in it at that certain point. So 2 recordings that week. And I was struggling, if I'm honest. So how they managed, recording it every day, basically, I think those guys do, don't they? It's impressive.
Chris and Dave definitely do. I think Steve he does Super Dummies every other week. I think I Am the Knight is every week. And then I think he's often on the DC Comics News podcast as well. And I think he's occasionally on the Harley Quinn podcast as well. So I think Steve does, I think Steve does at least 1 a week, but it can be up to 3 or 4. And I think Dave and Chris do, when it's Love Island season for the reality cast, it's like more than 1 a day sometimes. It's a lot. I will say your video is frozen to me, which for audio listeners is not a problem. But it's funny because you're frozen in a really scary, blurry state. You're kind of doing that like in the blur. So I don't know if it's worth turning the video off and turn it back on.
I'm just wondering if maybe what funny face I can pull for when I come back on.
Oh, that would be brilliant. I'll try and screenshot at the right time.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back. That's wonderful. But I cut what you were saying to say that. Unfortunately,
that's all right. I'm sure we can just
we'll figure it out. So you talk about let's talk about pop girls. You're talking about the Nevers and things like that, and obviously how you're podcasting, how it was hard to do it, every week, and fortunately because I'm working from home, I managed to balance, because I started the Star Wars podcast just as we went into COVID, so I managed to blitz so much Star Wars reading and things while I was working from home, and it wasn't very busy because I work in insurance. I primarily do with motor claims, so obviously when COVID happened there was no one really driving, so it was quite easy. So you obviously did the Nevers, which is your first sort of proper solo thing. And then there's Pop Gorillas, which is a new cool concept which I thoroughly enjoy. It's a nice surprise. So why don't you tell people about that, because I think it's a really fun idea.
Surprise, surprise, who's the brains behind it? It's Tony Farina. So again, just whenever I watch anything really, or read anything, I just do like a little blog on it, and I just do it as like a little diary, really, just for myself. I never pay any attention if it gets viewed or anything. I'm not too fussy really. It's more just for myself, almost like a running record of what I've seen and when I've seen it. And again, it's just another list for some reason that my brain wants to keep. So from that, Tony thought, could we do that bite-sized idea, but record it and put it out there. So yeah, we discussed it, and we've got my sister involved. I think we did put it out to a couple other people, but they felt like it was another commitment they didn't want to take on for now. And we're just getting that going, really. So for a while, they were coming out as a little kind of like intros or outros to other people's shows, and I think you kindly offered to allow it on yours as well, as some other shows. And then we've recently launched our own feed. And I think we're going to continue the collaboration with Comics in Motion. I think it is still going to go on certain shows here and there, but we didn't want to be hijacking people's shows all the time. We felt that like it was a bit unfair. So yeah, we're now launching. We've got to do a bit more to get it going. We've started the Twitter up, and we started the podcast feed up on Anchor. But the idea is, so in less than sort of 3 minutes, really 3 to 4 minutes, try and keep it as spoiler free as possible. Just review what we feel like we want to review at that point. So it doesn't have to be current. As much of my film watching isn't really. If I'm following along with VHS or Spider Dan or Anger Andy, which I like to do, I like to follow on people what they're watching, or whatever you're inspired to watch at that point, I suppose. Often we have family movie night every Saturday. So what we're watching on family movie night won't tend to be current, because I'm showing my eldest, some of the classics that I really enjoy, depending on what his tastes are at the time. So yeah, so throwing those out there, and then we'll see where that goes, really. I mean, I think it's a fun concept. I think we need to solidify a little bit. I'd like to get kind of a bank of tracks to put behind. I'm sort of getting royalty-free stuff at the moment to support it, trying to match it to what the content of what I'm talking about is, which works okay. I'm not very musically minded, so I wouldn't be able to make anything myself. But I think, anyone out there wants to come at us and provide us with some royalty-free music, I think, I'd like it to have a bit more of a cohesive feel across the three of us.
That's good. That's a cool idea. Yeah, it's short style reviews that are spoiler free, so anyone can kind of listen and tune in. They don't have to be, because it's one of those things. Like, I love VHS Strikes Back and Comics in Motion, the TV and movie show, and obviously I do some amount of reviews and things on mine. I find with series generally, I want to hear what people have to say about it generally more. And if it's a film, I find if it's a film that's in a universe or in a franchise, I really like hearing people talk about it. When it's an individual film, it's kind of a dependent, like a lot of sci-fi films and things I love hearing people talking about. But when it comes to like comedy films, like I've listened to a few podcasts where they talk about comedy films, but it's like listening to two people talk for an hour about a film that's an hour and a half long that's funny is nothing against people who make this content or consume it. Is completely fine. I get it somewhat, but for me personally, I'm just like, I don't care enough for being blunt. Whereas like with sci-fi, because that's like my jam, anyone talking about something sci-fi-ish, that I'm really sort of invested. And when it's a big franchise, like the guys, Chris and Dave, they've been doing the Spider-Man run through, and I think they've recently been doing the X-Men films or the original ones as well. And that got me into thinking, I'm going to show Megan the X-Men films. So we've finished First Class the other day. So we did the trilogy, Origins Wolverine, First Class, then we're doing Days of Future Past, and then Logan. And not going to talk about Dark Phoenix because I haven't seen it, and apparently it's awful.
It's not as bad as people make out. Honestly, I don't think it's that bad. I think it's all right. I think people are predisposed to disliking it, as I think they are with a lot of the X Universe stuff, which is a shame. I really like it. It's the franchise that it feels okay to beat on for some reason. I don't know why, and has done ever since The Last Stand, really.
Yeah, I like The Last Stand. When I rewatched it with Megan, I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. I was like, there's a couple of lines in it that are a bit crap, and Vinnie Jones is not good in it at all. But like, aside from that, like, it's pretty dark. There's some very heavy moments in it. It's actually, there's certain elements of it that are very well thought out, and I really like the storyline when you got Rogue, and she's sort of tussling with whether or not to get the cure and things. It's like, this always quite weighted. It has weight that a lot of normal superhero stuff doesn't have. Like, Megan said she was getting a bit sick of superhero stuff, but we got to the X-Men, and she was like, I quite like this because it's not about an origin story. It's just when you hit puberty, luck of the dice, you may or may not get this power, and she was saying for the trilogy, she was like, God, being Rogue would suck. And like, that's the whole point. And when her and Storm have that talk, and Storm's like, when there's nothing to cure, Megan was like, yeah, coming from the woman who can shoot lightning, whereas this girl literally cannot touch her boyfriend. Like, how can you even compare that? That's not fair. Like, most of these mutants are they have magic powers, whereas some people don't have that. And I know, like, Fantastic Four somewhat explores it with Ben Grimm and things. Is it Ben Grimm? Is her name?
Yeah.
So it explores him being the Thing and stuff, which is cool. But it's like, it's got a whole other layer to it. And I don't know why everyone hated X-Men Origins Wolverine. I love it. Like, I understand the Deadpool criticism, and the CGI for some reason is worse than the original X-Men trilogy, which I don't understand. His claws do not look real at certain points. But the rest of it, like, I think, at least in broad strokes, the plot is really interesting, hearing about Wolverine, like, all that sort of stuff. Like, I really enjoyed it. The Wolverine, for me, is the weakest film, because it felt like an action martial arts film, but not as cool as some of the best ones, like The Raid or things like that. I was like, this is just a watered down action film with Wolverine in it.
Yeah,
it's like the best part is like the first 15 minutes before he goes to Japan, and then the post-credit scene, and the rest of it is just basically PG-13 action with not really any blood, and you're like, this is all right, and then it ends, and you're like, okay. I don't know what you think about X-Men in general, the kind of lot of them.
Yeah, I don't know. That is a franchise I've got on my list to rewatch at some point. It's another thing I like to do. So, like when the Fast and Furious 9 came out, I rewatched them all in the build.
I do that. I normally show Megan as well. I'm like, I get to refresh and show her, so we can go to the cinema together. Yeah, I do love doing that.
So X-Men was on my list for New Mutants, but that kept slipping back and back and back. So I just never got around to it. So I think I would at some point, because there's some I haven't seen since their first release in the cinema.
I was the same.
Origins being the same, being one, I think. I don't think I've seen that since the cinema. So it's definitely on my list. I think they're generally underrated, if I'm honest. I think they're either good or fine, with a couple of standouts. Yeah. I think Days of Future Past and Logan stand out.
I'm glad you said that. I was about to say.
And X2 actually as well, and that's being a lot better.
Yeah, I was worried you were going to say X-Men Days of Future Past wasn't that good. I was like, no, what are you about to say to me?
No,
that's like one of my favourite films ever, like superhero-wise, and as is Logan, to be fair. I
think I know it's true of all properties, but the X-Men is so beloved, and I think because of as you said, the point of it is to empathise with these people, to see yourself in them, and I know that you can say that about all characters, but the X-Men were so powerful and became so popular because of what they were standing for, at the time they were coming out. I think people really hold on to those and hold on to the storylines of them as well. So when Dark Phoenix isn't done right in its 2 iterations, and even Days of Future Past, which is massively changed from the comic run, but they did a good job of it within the movie universe. I think it's the franchise that people seem to get the most upset about when there being changes, whereas Winter Soldier comes out and they're like, oh yeah, that fits within the MCU, so we're fine with it. But within the X-Men universe, it seems to always be a problem that it's not how it was in the comics. I don't know why.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder if I feel like it partly because X-Men, if it wasn't for Spider-Man, X-Men, and then the sort of the trilogy of kind of rough around the edges, well, actually probably quadrilogy, got Ghost Rider, Hulk, Elektra, and Daredevil, which I like Daredevil. I do not like Elektra. I think Hulk is awful, but I've heard the Comics and Trial thing. I don't know if people like it, and that's completely fine.
Praising Tony, and now we're upsetting him.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. I know. I think Steve likes Hulk as well. I haven't got a problem with people liking him. I just despise it. Ghost Rider, I don't think is great, but I actually really like Daredevil, and I know a lot of people don't. I think did you do Comics on Trial with Daredevil?
I did concentrate for Blade Trinity, but I do like Daredevil as well.
It was Blade Trinity. No, yeah. Sorry, someone else did it for Daredevil. I can't remember who now. Sorry, guys. I knew I'd heard you on Comics on Trial in one of those things. I mean, I like Blade Trinity as well. I think it's definitely the weakest of the three, but that wasn't the point you were necessarily not making. It's one of those things with X-Men. I think they do it a lot, where it's like, here's 3 films, and there's normally one that's the weakest, and it's quite like even the Wolverine trilogy, which, calling it a trilogy is kind of loose. There's just kind of 3 films that aren't specifically in order of something else, and they've all got Wolverine in. Generally Origins is considered the weakest one. With the original X-Men, you've got the third one's the weakest one. Then funnily enough, with First Class Days of Future Past, you've got Apocalypse. So it's this weird thing where I think people get upset because it's the same with Spider-Man. I just realised Spider-Man 3 is weak. They just can't superhero things before the MCU. I just don't think they could land the third film, really. Even Blade, to be honest.
Blade, and I'd argue The Dark Knight as well. Dark Knight Rises is, for me,
that's definitely the weakest
of the 3. Absolutely, yeah, it's true. It's hard to stick that landing, isn't it? Particularly when you're trying to do something that's rounding off, when usually the second film is that step up as well, isn't it? Look at the X-Men, you look at Dark Knight, you look at Spider-Man, all of those is second movie is a massive step up from the first one. So I think the third one is always difficult to finish off, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird one. So we're linking with that links in with basically your job in some ways, which is you teach film, and so I want to ask, how do you think How long have you generally, don't want to delve into your personal life too much, where's your address, where do you live, where did you graduate, when did you actually start teaching sort of media, film, that sort of area?
Sure. So I retrained as a teacher when I was 30. So I've been teaching now for 10 years. So obviously taking away, I'm 41, so taking away the training year. And then media and film is my passion. I studied media back at school. I studied film at university. In my 20s, I did film reviews for a newspaper, very small scale. It was a free newspaper in London, one of these ones given out at stations and stuff. I didn't get paid for it, but I got to see films free and early. So yes, yeah, right, fine, yeah, I'll do that. Great. Particularly in the 20s when sometimes, money's a bit tight.
Oh, yeah.
At that stage of your life. So I've always been involved in that realm, really. And I just got a bit dissatisfied with doing an office job, if I'm honest. So I looked into joining the fire brigade and applied for that and got through to the interview stage, but didn't get any further, unfortunately. And I did that twice. I just thought, this obviously isn't going to work out. The interview for that is really interesting. It's all about like kind of scenarios. It's not like, what's your name? What's your best quality? What's your worst quality? It's none of that. It's like, here's a scenario. What would you do?
Oh, okay.
So clearly it looks into your kind of makeup and whether you are a fit for that job. So I decided after 2 attempts that it's probably not going to work out. I could keep going down this road. So I tried some other things out and I worked at a school as a TA. I just jacked in my job and I worked 2 days a week, obviously on much less money, but I just thought it was worth it for a while. I got a job at a pub and just to see how I felt about it, and then got into teacher training. So yeah, I've been doing that for 10 years. You get paired up being a media and film teacher with English, basically. It's always in the same department. So I've worked at 2 different schools. So, I mean, always at the 2 schools always that I've worked at, it's paired up. I guess it's very similar skills. They're totally transferable, right? When you read a book and you analyze the words that are used, what's the subtext of that? What's the author trying to say? When you watch a film, what's the camera angles that I've used? What's the sound choices? What's the lighting? What's the subtext? What's the director trying to say? So it makes sense. They're paired up. So in an ideal world, I'd be a media and film teacher. We don't live in an ideal world, sadly. So I do teach English as well, which I do enjoy because, I'm passionate about comics, obviously. Reading as well. It is the thing that always comes last on my list, if I'm honest. Not for any reason. It's just, reading a book is a endeavor sometimes. It takes a lot of investment. I'm really bad at starting a book. The first half of a book will take me forever to read. And then I'll race through the back half. Yeah, absolutely. If it's a good book, of course. So I do, or, if it's a choice of what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to put on a movie first, and then it's going to be a comic, and then it's going to be a book. So that's where my brain works. So in an ideal world, I'd just be teaching media and film. And I think because I've always been in this world, really, since I was taught how to analyze stuff for myself, I've always had that part of my brain switched on. And it's really interesting doing it with students for the first time who've never kind of done anything like this before. And you show them like a choice that's been made or a series of choices. So often I would print out some film stills and show them some of a scene. And you see their little brain switch on, like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I never thought of it in that context before. And I think once that part of your brain is switched on, it's just on. And it doesn't take, going to university to do it. It just once you realize there's conscious choices being made and everything that's being done, it becomes fascinating to see and understand why those choices might have been made.
Yeah, and it translates, doesn't it, to yourself when you consume film yourself, because it's, one of the things I like to joke about, I'm pretty certain I do it on air because I don't want to sound like I'm talking about Tony negatively behind his back, because this is a very good thing about Tony, but it always cracks me up whenever he does podcasts. And I think he did it on the 30 Days of Night podcast, which he did with a chap from another podcast whose name escapes me, so sorry, Tony, and the guest on that for forgetting his name. But when they were talking about that, and it's the running joke with Tony where he thinks of like an interpretation which is so complex and brilliant, it couldn't possibly be what the writer was making, because sometimes what the writer was making falls a bit flat. So it's like 30 Days of Night, he's like, maybe it's talking about sort of, I think it was like isolation, and then that linked with something else, and it was so clever and brilliant. And I was like, and I think the guest was basically like, that problem, if they were thinking that, it would be a much better graphic novel than it actually was. Like you're giving them far too much credit for being that brilliant when you've just kind of come up with that idea almost yourself through the signs they've given you. And it's like, whenever Tony describes something, there's some of those times I was like, do you think maybe this, and they go, no, I don't. I don't think that's what, I think they were just making a cool zombie vampire film, comic, whatever. But you know what I mean? And it's like,
I do.
Because he's an English teacher as well. I think it does come with that sort of mindset in a lot of ways. As you said, it's not, it is something kind of, a light bulb goes on. And once you kind of understand, it's hard to unsee it that way.
It is. And I think for a while it affected the way I watched films, if I'm honest. I couldn't really switch it off. I couldn't switch off the idea of analysing. And I have had students, whether they're trying to say it in a way to connect with you or not, I don't know. Like saying something similar. Oh, now I've learned this from you, so like it feel, I can't switch off when I'm trying to watch something for fun. Because I often talk to them about it, about how that's what happened to me. And I think eventually you get over it. And, I can totally switch off and just watch something for fun now. But I like your phrasing of this idea of it being a light bulb moment. It's that if it's a good director, of course, or a good writer, everything is there for a reason. And you can see it. You can see it. Handmaid's Tale, I just finished watching season 4 of that a couple of days ago. And that is one of the best made things I've ever seen. Everything is there for a reason. Absolutely everything. Particularly in the framing of shots is fascinating. Where they put people in you and I are sitting here right now and we're in the middle, right? Yeah. Because that's where your eyes go. But Handmaid's Tale very rarely puts anyone there. And in fact, we won't necessarily get into it. But I mean, in terms of like splitting up the screen into a grid, people don't tend to put in films and TV, people right in the middle. But Handmaid's Tale takes it to the extremes. They'll be right in the tiny little corner. And it's telling you a story about status and power and who's owning that scene. And it's a fascinating show to watch for that because it's quite wordy, don't get me wrong. Dialogue is important, but you probably could watch that show and mute and know everything that's going on. It's brilliant.
It's very interesting because there's certain directors who specialise in that. There's two that come to mind for me, which is two very different directors, which is Edgar Wright and Wes Anderson. And obviously Wes Anderson is famous a lot of the time for his framing. He likes to have a still frame and things come into the shot. He likes things to be symmetrical. There's videos on YouTube which shows that literally it's symmetrical to like the pixel almost when you're looking at it, and it's like absolutely perfect. And he specifically does it, and then he uses asymmetry when things have like a disequilibrium. All these sorts of elements to it because he is very attention detailed. Color schemes always matched, etc. Then you look at Edgar Wright and because he likes to intertwine comedy, it's all the subtle little things that are normally the funniest elements in a lot of ways. The most obvious example, obviously you've got the Untitled Trilogy and things, and you've got Baby Driver, and he's, Spacey's done a lot of other stuff, but like Scott Pilgrim is probably the easiest one it's a good entry point for Edgar Wright because that film, everything's very obvious. I love it. It's one of my favorite films ever. But it's basically, everything's in your face. You've got this in a lot of ways. There are some cool little side things that you can notice if you don't have on the second or third or whatever watch. You can see things in the distance that may not have been so obvious to begin with. But with that, there's things popping out the screen. There's noises. There's video games. It's very fast and intense and flashing lights and stuff. And with that, that's like if you almost look for those things in another Edgar Wright movie, you can see that. And it's just he does it so well with. One of the biggest examples I can think of is with Ant-Man, where he originally was going to direct it and then probably was going to make it too amazing. I mean, I love Ant-Man as a film, but he was probably going to make it the greatest film ever made, and Marvel couldn't deal with that, so they just pushed him to the side and let him just air quotes produce. And then there's the scene where Ant-Man and the Yellow Jacket are fighting, and it's the Thomas the Tank Engine bit, and it's just one of the funniest, most brilliant scenes there is, I think, in the MCU of just, it's so intense, the music's coming and it's, oh my god, the train's going to hit you, and then it's like, oh, but they're tiny and it's a toy train, it couldn't do any damage at all. And it's that thing where it's all perspective and how it's filmed and things gives it a level of tense, but you kind of realise at the last frame, go, wait, isn't that Thomas the Tank Engine? And then it hits and zooms out and you're like, oh, I see. And Edgar Wright, I think, it's almost opposite to Wes Anderson in a lot of ways, the filmmaking, but they both pay attention so much to what they do, and that's why I think they have such a cult following. And I think that's why so many people are such big fans of theirs, or certain people. I think Wes Anderson has a lot less people who like him. Megan isn't overly a fan. I absolutely adore him, whereas Edgar Wright, most people like Edgar Wright movies that, like, in general, it's hard to find someone who hates Shaun of the Dead, because that just means your film taste is terrible. I'm sorry. It's one of the best films ever. Sorry, listeners, it's one of the best films ever made, But I don't know what you think about those two, and any directors that you really enjoy or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page with you. I think they're both brilliant. I mean, I think I understand why people don't like Wes Anderson, because everything's mannered, right? It's all very
controlled.
It's all very controlled. He often comes into that criticism of like emotionless, which I understand but don't find. But I mean, my favourite filmmaker is David Fincher, who also comes in for the same criticism too, that his films are cold and they're distant. And they're not. It's just he's another one who's meticulous and he controls what's happening in a scene. And if you don't connect with the way that he's telling his story through camera work, through framing, through his cinematography, less so through performance, I think is the issue, really. Not that people aren't great in his movies, they always are. I think I can understand why people feel like they're kind of being kept behind a wall. Like Michael Mann gets it as well. People say that his films are emotionless and they're always at a distance.
Which films has Michael Mann made? He's not one who springs to mind.
He is his big, most famous one, but he did Miami Vice.
Oh, God. Wait, I haven't seen that
Black
film.
Hat with Chris Hemsworth is fairly much. He did Ali with Will Smith.
I don't think I've seen any of these films.
Okay.
I think we're film buff and I've never even heard of Michael Mann. I'm going to have to subtly look him up while you're talking, because I imagine I've probably seen one random film of his that's like
I'm sure you have.
Really small. But please continue with Michael Mann and other directors similar.
No, yeah, I mean, I think, I just think I understand. Whereas Edgar Wright is much more populist, isn't he? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think, we could debate indie versus mainstream, and both have their absolute merits. But he knows how to capture an audience, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Everything he does is about drawing you into his world, because the stories he tells ultimately are about the people in the middle of them. So I think, I understand like why, where one is more broadly and widely appreciated. I mean, I think, you look at Wes Anderson, like he said some fascinating stuff about like, I'm turning into teacher mode now, about like the symmetry of his shots and stuff. And my brain's immediately going, oh yeah, he must be a fan of German expressionism cinema and silence. I'm sure he's got influences from silent cinema and Murnau and blah blah blah. This is the mode my brain goes into when I'm teaching. The students I get them at 16 for film studies, 16 to 18, and very often, obviously, they're students I've taught earlier on at school to English, and without fail, every year I'll get somebody that says, you're like a different person, you're a different teacher when you're doing film studies. You've taught me for 3 years English, and thanks, I got my GCSE. To which I say, well, you got it, so you don't need to thank me. But like you're a different person to teach film, and of course I am, because I'm coming alive, because it's my passion. I absolutely love it, and it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? You're doing something you love.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love podcasting so much. I just looked up Michael Mann. The only film I've seen of his is, it's not even Heat. I haven't seen that either. It's Public Enemies.
Oh, okay, yeah, with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, which I enjoy. I didn't think it was amazing. I liked it much more on the second watch than the first watch. But yeah, I mean, the thing with films and directors and whatnot, it is. There's so many things. I've got about 3 questions in my head all at the same time, and they're all pushing up. One's about the teacher thing, and one's about this, and one's about that, and one's about all kinds of stuff, which isn't good podcasting. I should have written it down in some sort of vague order. But when it comes to talking about film, I find whenever I've got Megan a lot more into films since we've been together, especially because we've been through pandemic and there's basically nothing else to do really, is there? So we've watched the MCU, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit extended editions, lots of sort of big hitter movies and things that just kind of need to be seen. And the X-Men films. It's kind of like stuff that's either going to be important for MCU stuff that we're going to watch. Like I made her watch all the Spider-Man films, even though she wasn't the biggest fan, because she loves Tom Holland, and that's kind of probably the best Spider-Man so far. So you go back and you watch kind of Tobey Maguire do a really good job, but he wasn't perfect. And then Andrew Garfield do a really good job in a different way to Tobey Maguire, who still wasn't perfect. And then you've got Tom Holland, who just smashes it out of the park for both of them. And she obviously watched them and she's like, oh, these aren't quite as good. But when she watched... Do you mind if I say what is in a trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home? If you haven't seen it, I won't.
I've seen it. So
okay, that's cool. So minor spoilers. I know there's some listeners of mine, Tonya Todd's one of them, who absolutely despises hearing any spoilers of any kind for anything, which I respect hugely, but I just can't adhere to because I'm weak. But for the next 10 seconds, I'm going to quickly say something that's in the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, Tonya, in case you're listening. And that is that, obviously in it, Doc Ock is in it. And that was announced ages ago. Fortunately, Megan doesn't see a lot of news when it comes to casting and stuff, because she's on the internet, not in that realm, so she doesn't get the algorithm getting her. Whereas I obviously am, so I get all the news. And I saw that the guy who played him, whose name is, can you remember his name?
Alfred Molina.
There we go. I'm glad I had you here for a reason, just for me to talk about films and me just point at you and you say an actor's name. Obviously, he was announced and he admitted he was being Doc Ock. So immediately it was like, okay, well, I know he's going to be in the film, which is cool, but it takes away a little bit. But when Megan saw the trailer, she was like, oh, is that Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2? It's like, yeah, it is, but she didn't even like Spider-Man 2 that much. But once you've, like we kind of have, I think one of the reasons the MCU works so well is because people have just had years to really only watch 1 or 2 films a year, which isn't that much. I hear people go, oh, MCU, they've got way too many films coming out. This year, I'd probably argue they do because it's like 4 or 5 films. But normally it's like 2 films a year is nothing. As like an afternoon. And it's like you just keep up with that vaguely. And when these big films come out, because you know all these connective tissue and stuff, it means so much. And I think with us who, obviously I'm younger than you are, but you know, still grew up watching the big hitter superhero films. You've got, you know, the Batman films and Superman and stuff, but I mean like post 2000, you've got X-Men, Spider-Man, and all this other things. When the MCU comes along, it's like, oh man, I wonder if they're going to incorporate this element or that element, or how they're going to do this bit. And obviously reading comics adds another layer and that sort of thing. So I just think I've managed to loop that background to talk about Megan about 6 times in this conversation, funny enough, because I think it's just because I've been watching the X-Men films and I just want to talk about them, which is ruining it. But I'm going to have a breather because I've just rambled and derailed the conversation. Please say something.
Well, I think, I think the difference with what's happened with the MCU, I think, is not just interconnectivity, which is awesome, which has obviously been in comics for a long time. I think they are absolute masters at misdirection. So the amount of trailers they've come out with, I mean, you're right, things get spoiled on the internet all the time. You know, I'm old enough that I used to have to go to campus at uni to use the internet, that I didn't have it, you know, just at my beck and call. My eldest son can't believe I didn't get my first mobile phone until I was 19. It's just like beyond him. He's 9 and he's begging for it already.
I was 60 when I got mine, like a proper one. So
yeah. But yeah, so I've got vivid memories of walking to campus and logging on and going on to comingsoon.net and looking at trailers and film news and all that kind of stuff, like in those kind of early days. So you're right, things do get spoiled, but they're really good at that kind of misdirection, aren't they? I mean, you know, Infinity War was a great example with them all running out of the Wakandan like forest, and you had like Hulk there, and none of that's in the movie because it couldn't be, because that moment doesn't happen. So they've specifically created that scene for the trailer in order to throw people off the scent that actually we're not really going to get Hulk in this movie. We're going to have Mark Ruffalo in a Hulkbuster suit, and they're really good at that. That misdirection. I keep using that word. I was trying to think of another one, but I can't. English teacher, you know, please don't send your kids to me. They're also really good at putting like little teasers out there, you know, like mentioning a name. Oh, well, you know, so-and-so is in talks for She-Hulk, and they'll see how the internet deals with it. And if the internet seems to like it, suddenly it's announced, you know, oh, Tatiana Maslany is now cast as She-Hulk. They're really good at that as well. I think, you know, this has been leaked. So they're really on their game. I think they really know what they're doing in terms of their marketing, definitely.
And with sort of passions and things, because one of the things with Megan, so I remember why I brought her up actually, because I've been getting her into films, showing a lot of these other films, because a lot of the time when I hang out with her friends, who they're all delightful people, a lot of them are massively into films. But Megan before me wasn't. She enjoyed films, but she wasn't like, her main thing is Harry Potter. She adored Harry Potter above all. She's Harry Potter, I'm Star Wars, but we both loved the other one. And it's like, when we hang out with our friends, often they talk to me about films a lot, because we've got like we've got a film poster up, which is like a scratch off poster, 100 films, and you scratch them off when you watch them and things. It's got Shawshank Redemption, but it's also got like In Bruges and stuff in there. Green Mile.
I may well have the same one.
Oh, probably do, yeah. So it's really cool and stuff. And I've got like hundreds of DVDs and Blu-rays and things. So whenever people like film, the first thing they do when they come into the lounge is go, ooh, and then look through that and basically ignore Megan and just talk to me for like ages about film. And I've noticed that at the start, because we've been together for over 3 years now, towards the start of our relationship, she wouldn't necessarily try and get involved that much because she just didn't have the background knowledge. But because now she's been a part of so many conversations with films, and because she's now seen so many that somewhat at least relate to them or have some sort of connection, she's much more involved with that. And I think, that's a big part of it as well, is I didn't really realise until dating Megan that there's so many films that connect to so many other films, but also how some people just aren't that into films as much a lot of the time. And I feel like it's similar in some ways with music, because I didn't get into music as much until I got into heavy metal, and then once I got into that, then I liked pop music more, I liked this more, I liked everything else more. And I think it's the light bulb moment is that with one's own interest and passions, sometimes it could take years for you to be into something. Some people can force you into it. It doesn't really work. You know, the amount of people that I've shown certain bands to, and they're just not that into it, but then they get into other bands years later, and then get into the bands that I'd recommend them prior, and people have done that for me. And I think it's a weird thing with people of like being into that passionate thing that you love, and films. You rewatch a film years later, and because you're in essence a different kind of person as you were before, in some ways, it hits in different ways. So with you being a teacher, obviously that must be quite a big thing, where when you were younger you watched the film and like, oh, this is sick, and then you watch it later and you're like, oh, because I noticed XYZ, maybe it's not as good, or even vice versa.
That's definitely true. I mean, obviously that's one of the key features that we do on Season's Greeting, is that we look at it through the 2021 lens. And I think that's important. I mean, I'm a bit wary of everything being criticised for being in its time and its pace. I don't think we should do that. But I also don't think we should shy away from considering what could be done slightly better and what could have been improved. Yeah, it's true. I think what you said there is really insightful. That idea of, like, things definitely change, and we have that nostalgia and we hold on to things, and that will never go away. I think, probably my top 5 movies will never change the rest of my life, no matter what comes out, because they mean the most to me. And I grew up watching Die Hard, and I grew up watching Back to the Future, and that will never change. I grew up watching Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Go on, name the other two. Go on.
Raiders actually isn't in my top 5. What is it? So yeah, Die Hard and Back to the Future are the two obvious. Star Wars New Hope is the other one. They're probably my top 3. I love Rocky, the original, and Fight Club probably would be my...
I love Fight Club so goddamn much.
And that, for me, again, that's such a moment in time. So I was 19 when that came out, and I was studying film at uni, and still that came out, and I was like, what? You can do this in film? This is amazing. It blew my mind watching it in the cinema. 1999 was a good year, man. We had Matrix and we had Fight Club.
I was talking about this at work today. Literally
we had Magnolia that year as
I was saying my birthday, my birth year, 94. I was saying 94 and 99 are two of the best film years ever. Because 94, I think, was like Forrest Gump, and I think, was Shawshank 99 or 94?
Shawshank sounds like 94 sounds about right.
I think so as well. And then I just looking through them, I was like, oh, all these comedy films as well, and like so many. I think Four Weddings and a Funeral was either 94 or 99 as well. There's so many different films like that, and there's so many great years for them. But yeah, Fight Club, like David Fincher, like he's one of my favorite directors ever. Like I think Danny Boyle and David Fincher are probably my 2 favorite directors ever, I think.
Okay.
Like I love Wes Anderson movies, but Danny Boyle, when I watched Trainspotting, that changed my life. Like as in, I was 15, I think. Year 10. So I was 15 years old, and I remember my religious studies teacher, in my school, because it was not a religious school at all, for religious studies at GCSE, or no, maybe it was year 9 actually, because I remember other people being in it. Yeah, just the standard curriculum one. We did the least religious one, so we did about morality and stuff. We did about like drugs, and then we did about euthanasia, abortion, those sorts of moral questions to do with law and etc. And we talked about drugs, and one of the things we had to go on Talk to Frank, the website. And went over there and looked up loads of information on drugs and stuff. And I remember talking to the teacher, my RS teacher at the time, and he mentioned Trainspotting, and he was like, oh yeah, it's a very good film, it's interesting seeing about addiction, blah blah blah. He was like, that toilet scene is horrendous, and I was like, okay, I know there's a weird toilet scene. So I watched it when I was probably a few months later maybe, and the toilet scene didn't bother me at all, but the whole sort of view on addiction and how, like, I'd seen, I think at that point, because I've got 2 older brothers who are 17 and 20 years older than me, so that's how I've seen Terminator, Aliens, all these sort of cool 80s films. I had them to show me, but like when I watched Trainspotting, it was just like, this is really, it's British social realism, so it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I was like, this is just like real life. I knew Ewan McGregor because Obi-Wan and stuff, but I was just like, this is like, it doesn't feel Hollywoodized, it doesn't feel glamorous. This is just kind of, this is a life of a heroin addict, and it's really intense, but it's not like, oh, woe is me, life is awful. It's kind of like, it's hard to do this. It's hard to be a heroin addict, although it is completely, for the most part, on me. It's still, there's these other factors that kind of contribute to it, and it really, really changed that, as well as a book called Heroin Diaries by Nikki Sixx, the basis of Motley Crue. That book and reading and watching Trainspotting, those two together completely changed my view on addiction, like permanently. Like I never looked at addiction in the same way because of that, and they're both about heroin. So even something like a film, it can change how you perceive the world, and that's what a lot of good films of social commentary can do and things. Agreed.
I mean, Trainspotting's on our list that we teach. And it's a brilliant one to do. So we're looking at showing that to 16, 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on their age when they're watching it. And it came out when I was 16. So we're all at that, it came out in 96. So we're all at that sort of age. It's the perfect time to see it.
Agreed.
I would argue it's probably a flawless movie.
Mm.
And I'm with you, it's 5 stars. I love it. It's not one I go back to and watch a lot because at times it's a pretty harrowing watch.
I do go for a phase watching it a lot.
yeah. I mean, I think, when it came out, everyone did, we all had that poster on the wall.
I had the poster.
Choose Life.
Yeah, all the little choose life, choose a fucking great television, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. I had that poster on my wall for probably about 10 years.
Oh, good. I'm glad that continued past my generation too. And you're right. There's so much that's going on in that movie. There's so much that's being said. And that's what's fascinating when I'm teaching is that you can look at Trainspotting on a surface level and enjoy it, but there's so much more that you can investigate and look at in there as well. And then you start building in the kind of the historical context for the students and what was going on in England at the time it was set, and then also the time it was made and why in 96 are we making a film set in the 80s and what are they trying to... So yeah, you're right. There's so much to say. Danny Boyle is amazing. And I think what is an inspiration about him is that he can jump from genre to genre, and still produce the quality that he does. And I think he's almost, I'm trying to think how to word this properly. There's a wonderful scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I know is divisive, but I absolutely love it.
I haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Okay, so I won't. This isn't a spoiler. Don't worry.
That's fine. I trust you. It's on my list. I've got it on Blu-ray, but it's a big Tarantino film that I want to watch, but it's obviously quite long.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is quite long. But there's a wonderful scene where they're talking about like the process of acting. And a character says like, "Well, if you change how I look, people won't recognise me. They won't know it's me." And the director's like, "Yes, you'll be acting, darling." And there's a lovely moment in the movie where like it's a real wake up call for the character. And I think Danny Boyle is like as a director, like he almost disappears into his works. Like I do prefer Fincher, but a Fincher movie is a Fincher movie. It's his movie. You can see stuff in it. There's certain things he does in all his films, and there's certain topics actually that he keeps coming back to in his films. That make it very obviously a Fincher movie. Whereas I don't think Boyle does that. I think he disappears into it and the subject matter is what matters to him. There's an awesome YouTube online that you may have seen. I don't know. It's by the Nerd Writer or Nerd Writer 1, I think his name is.
I don't think I've heard of that, no.
And it's called How David Fincher Hijacked Your Eyes.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
It's brilliant. And it's, as somebody who has watched his films for years, and I did my dissertation on his movies, actually. I did it on his presentation of masculinity in his movies, which was up at that point up to Fight Club. I'd never even noticed this or thought about this. So this YouTube video is, like I say, it's about 5 minutes long. It's brilliant. It's about how he uses the camera and how it matches what's going on in the scene. And once you see that, you're like, oh my God, like how has nobody noticed this before? Like how has it taken this clever person, this Nerd Writer 1, to notice it and talk about it? Well worth watching if you're a Fincher fan, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down. Well, I've also made a note, which is Boyle and Fincher, they're two of my favourite directors because I like happy endings, but I like darkness. I would rather a film brings you up, bluntly fucking destroys you, and at the end there's a glimmer of hope, and it ends kind of like that. Like Children of Men is quite a lot like that. I fucking love that film. And that's very much like that. I really like I think Danny Boyle a lot of the time is quite gritty, even in the films that are different genres. I haven't seen, I think, is it Catch Me If You Can? No, that's a completely different film. It's a film of Ewan McGregor, and it's like a comedy film. He made it after Trainspotting.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah. What's that called? That's
The Downwards
with
Way.
Cameron Diaz, that is with, isn't it? Yeah. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde type.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I saw it had mixed reviews when I looked it up ages ago, but I've seen like Your Shallow Grave, 28 Days Later, Sunshine, the main Trance, the main hitters. But like I think Danny Boyle is gritty, and he generally always has one really uncomfortable scene. In Trainspotting, I mean there's a couple in certain films, but like Trainspotting I think is the baby scene. In Slumdog Millionaire it's the eyes and the burning scene. In Trance there's a scene where someone gets their fingernails pulled off. It's like they're not it's not like Saw level or anything like that. It's just a scene that makes you feel uncomfortable because it's so close. It's real. All of these things realistically could happen to you. The baby one is depending on what part of the baby one. The start of the whole baby scene is absolutely harrowing and horrendous, and that can happen to anyone, you know. But obviously, when you see it on the wall later, not so much, but still, it's obviously all connected. Whereas I think David Fincher is very much darkness. David Fincher, I find, like, I haven't seen all his films. Obviously, I've seen Fight Club. I've seen his version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is one of my favorite films ever. I love that. And he's done so many others, which I'm mainly blanking on right now. What do you have a favorite?
Seven? Have you seen Seven?
Yeah, Seven is probably his most famous one, isn't it? I'd argue.
Zodiac.
Zodiac's the only one I didn't like.
Oh, okay.
I watched it. I think my hopes for it were different because, slight spoiler alert for people, obviously they didn't catch the Zodiac killer. It was never a thing. And
which is quite famously true to life.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I didn't know that going into it. I'd heard vaguely of the Zodiac killer, and I was like, "Oh, cool, film about the Zodiac killer." I'll watch that 2.5 hours, and then it ends, and you don't know, and it's like, oh,
yeah, okay, yeah.
It was like, well, that was kind of not. I don't want to say waste because it's quite insulting to everyone involved in that film, including him, and obviously people enjoy the film, but it was like, oh. It was just one of those endings. I was like, really? And it was just really unsatisfying. But that's on me for not knowing my history. And obviously that's what everyone in the film felt like. And that's kind of the point. But it was like all his other films have kind of got, you know, something. There's a bad guy of some vague description. Sure. And they generally get the justice in some sort of horrendous way. That's generally like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Like the rape scene. It's awful, but then they revisit it and flip it without spoiling it for other people. And that, although it's very hard to watch, it's kind of that, for me, it's that very dark, sadistic part of me that's like, yeah, you fucking deserve that. It's like, I don't want to watch people get harmed, but when it's someone who's a piece of shit and they deserve it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's in a film, I can watch most things in film. So I think that with Fincher, it's kind of almost, let's watch horrible things happen to people and then they kind of get what's coming to them. Whereas I think Danny Boyle was more like, here's a person which is going through life, but let's just push the envelope quite a bit, into how far obscure it kind of goes. Whilst most of his films realistically could happen, that's kind of the point. And I think that's kind of the difference in there, is like David Fincher is kind of pushing the line slightly further for a more consistent amount of time. And I think that's why I quite enjoy both of them. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's true. I think, Boyle lives in a realm of reality, whereas perhaps Fincher is more surreality. But interestingly, probably makes his films more realistically than Boyle does. I think the techniques Boyle employs are much more showy, much more surreal. Really interesting. I'd say go back and watch Zodiac,
right,
and do it from the perspective that it's a movie about obsession.
Right.
Forget the fact it's a serial killer at the middle. It's not really about that. It's about obsession and how the three main characters, the three men, can't forget about this case.
Yeah.
And then you think about it in terms of like David Fincher is famously an obsessive man and does 90 takes and all this stuff. I think it's a bit of a cathartic movie for him in that way as well. Not that it's changed him. I believe he still goes on and does all the same amount of takes. If you listen to what Ben Affleck says about Gone Girl.
Oh, that's another film of his I love. That is an ace movie. Yeah, it's one of those weird things. Yeah, I like with films. I call myself a film buff, but then I've made this joke on the podcast before, where it's like I'm a film buff, and then you say it to anyone, and they go, "Oh, really? Have you seen these three films?" You're like, "Nope, nope, and nope." Oh, but what about this really favourite film? No, I haven't seen that. Have you seen Citizen Kane? No, I haven't actually. Oh, have you seen this? No, sorry. And it's one of those things. So I'm always a little bit hesitant to call myself a film buff, but I've seen like so many.
It's interesting. I think that term gatekeeping has become prevalent in recent years. And I think there's lots of terms that become prevalent, which I think are a bit rubbish, but I think that's a really important one. And I think if you're a film buff, if you love watching films, it doesn't matter if you like watching the same 5 films. If they're the 5 films that mean the most to you and you love watching them, then you're a film buff. I don't believe that you need to have seen this list of movies to consider yourself a film buff. I think it's rubbish. And I think anyone who kind of gatekeeps in that way, but I don't know what I don't know what they're getting out of it. We're having discourse, and you've seen films I haven't seen, and I've seen films you haven't seen, and it really doesn't matter. I mean, clearly you're passionate. Clearly you love what you love, and you can talk about from a place that is as a fan, but also as somebody who has got interested into how that film has been made and what's the process behind it, and who's the director, and how do their films link together, and clearly you're a film buff because you've gone past the point of just like, oh, I've watched this movie, that was all right.
Yeah, there's a lot of films I've watched a lot of times as well, and
that's fine too.
Yeah, for different reasons and things. Well, I appreciate you saying that anyway, but with passion and sort of linking in with cult classics is something I want to talk about because I'm quite intrigued by it. Now, Megan, there's normally two ways that Megan will say she won't like a film. One is if something really, really, really weird happens in it. Like, have you seen the film Sorry to Bother You?
I haven't. No, that's the telephone exchange.
I really recommend it. It's unlike anything I've seen before. It's absolutely incredible.
It's the guy from
Get Out. He's in Get Out. He's not the main guy. He's you've seen Get Out, I assume.
I have, and he's in Atlanta, isn't he, with Donald Glover?
I haven't seen. I think he is. Okay. No, I think I remember someone saying he was. But in Get Out, he's the guy who's got the helmet on. And he's the one who says "Get Out" to Daniel Kaluuya's character. Well, Sorry to Bother You is amazing. I really recommend that. And this is not going to be a spoiler at all. But something very weird happens in it, and Megan enjoyed the film until this point. And if there's a scene which loses Megan, it's very hard to get her back on board again. Even if it's right at the end, if it's near the start, whatever. If there's one moment where she really doesn't like and pulls her out, it kind of ruins the whole experience. Whereas I'm a lot more forgiving because there's a lot of films I've seen which have some scenes, more so the Star Wars, the prequel trilogy, which are just annoying and, maybe not crap, but there's a couple of, most stuff for Jar Jar or Anakin and Padme is just a bit weak and it takes you out a little bit, but the cool bits for me are much better than the low bits in a sense. Sure. But for her, if a weird thing happens, or if if she knows it's called a cult classic beforehand, she won't intentionally dislike it. But even films I show her and I don't tell her she's a cult classic, she was like, I wasn't really a fan of that. I thought, and she was like, what do you think of it? And I was like, oh, I love it. It's great. It's a cult classic. She's like, that's why I didn't like it. And so I wanted to ask you, obviously being a film teacher, is there some sort of definition of cult classic? Is it that most people don't like it and a lot of people have to? Because like Fight Club's a good example of a cult classic where it didn't do well in the box office at all, yet it's rated it wasn't rated very well when it first came out hugely. But then it's kind of had the renaissance of home release. And there's quite a few films that have had that. Like the prequel trilogy is a very good example. Once memes became a proper thing on the internet and people kind of found how silly some of the bits in Star Wars can be, they used that. And now the user ratings of, most people enjoy the prequels now, and it's the sequel hating bandwagon everyone's on now. But that's a whole other conversation. But I wondered if you know a definition of sort of cult classics, or if there is one in particular.
So I think what you've just provided is one way to term it. That idea of, as you said, either not financially or not reviewed successfully to then have a renaissance and then be reconsidered later on. That's definitely one of them. I think more so box office wise, Fight Club, as you said, is a good example. Films that just don't make much money, but then get this second life. That's definitely true. But I think those films that don't necessarily get a big following, but the people that do love it are really voraciously and vocally in love with that movie, I think is another way you can think of cult classics, in that, and even if it is crap, and it doesn't matter if it's crap, people sometimes know it's crap, but they still love it anyway. And I think for me, that's probably the truer definition of a cult classic, where it really doesn't matter the quality. It means something to you and you want to celebrate that. So, The Room.
I was about to say The Room. Best example.
Absolutely.
Love it.
There probably isn't a better example anymore than that. People just want to celebrate it no matter what. So therefore it has to become a classic, right? Because if you've got a big bunch of fans who like it, and I guess by definition a cult is a group of people who are all interested in following the kind of the same ideal, that's where those two things meet together, right?
Yeah, the Room is a great example. And also I find that I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper here with what I'm about to say, but like I find that most people who really enjoy The Room are really into films, because if you're not that into films and you haven't seen that many films, you go, oh, that's just a crap film. But it's like if you actually watch it, it's almost like, I think it might be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse where they do this, where Miles, he answers wrong on, it's like a multiple choice thing. It's 4 things and he answers wrong on every single question. And the teacher goes to him and says, if you didn't know what you were doing and you completely guessed every one of these, there's no way you could have got them all wrong. Like, it's just statistically near on impossible. The only way you could have got it this wrong is for knowing what the answers are and not choosing them. The Room is kind of like that with movies, because it's so bad and it fails on so many levels on almost every aspect you look at it, that it's spectacular because it's so terrible. And it's so brilliant because all the dialogue is terrible. It doesn't make any sense. He reuses footage, which is a no-no. All the photo frames have got like the default forks in them, the fork britches from when you buy them from a cheap shop. It's just like every level of what film goers appreciate about films is done badly in The Room. And it's very rare to find a film like that. You know, most bad films, you get like, I mean, there's a lot of bad horror films that are cult classics as well, but they're like films like Demons and things. They're like so bad, they're funny because it's just like, it's a dumb horror film. And the line between scary and funny is very, very sort of thin, because it's all about surprise, really, at the end of the day. One's about surprise. Oh, I didn't expect that. Haha. And the other one's, oh shit, I didn't expect that. You know, there's generally it's a similar ride. You have to keep doing that, pulling the rug out from underneath the viewer and misdirecting people and etc. But with The Room, it's just like, yeah, every element of it just is bad. It looks bad in certain places. There's the horrible green screen. There's the jarring acting. There's scenes that don't fit together at all, and it's edited poorly. There's just, you could almost, if I tried to make a bad film, I'd still somehow, there'd be some things I'd somehow do that are good, even air quotes crap films that really fail, like some of the superhero films. Like Spider-Man 3 is quite divisive. A lot of people hate that film. I really still quite enjoy it in certain ways, but no one would say every single element of that film is terrible, because realistically, most of it's really good. It's just, there's a couple of elements that with the character and the story, but visually it still looks good. You know what I'm kind of saying with The Room, comparatively.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I have to watch student films every year, so I know what badly made films are.
Even them must be better than The Room, like in a critical sense, surely. Some of them.
Well, let's consider, you know, they're making it with no budget, and oftentimes nowadays just on their mobile phones. Let's give them some credit that they didn't have a good budget. And
well, yeah, with Tommy Wiseau having God knows how many millions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's true, and I think I guess the other way that I think of cult as well is that, you know, you mentioning horror made me think of this, is those films which really push the boundaries. So therefore they enter that realm of, you know, kind of cult because not everyone should watch this, I think is another way to think of it. So yeah, Demons, I hadn't seen until recently, actually, and because my friend Spider-Man was doing it on his podcast, I watched that and its sequel. Absolute joy in that movie.
I think I've seen one of them. I think I've got one of them on DVD. I can't remember if I have Demons or Demons 2. But
so one's in a cinema and one's in an apartment.
It's a cinema one I've seen.
That's the first one, yeah.
That's so good. It's so bad, but it's so good.
Yeah, exactly. It's so bad, it's so good. I mean, that's the famous phrase, isn't it? But there's certain films which, like, that French horror went through for a phase of this in the early aughts. I never know what to call that. I hate the term noughties. I hate the term aughts. But I mean, what do you pick? The zeros.
Early 2000s, I guess.
Yeah. That's probably the better way to say it. Quite. So yeah, French horror. So I was really interested in watching a lot of them. And there's a film called Martyrs.
Is that the one where where the end of the scene is a woman laying pregnant on stairs and they cut open her stomach and pull the baby out?
No, I have seen that as well, but I can't think what that's called.
I can never remember what that's called, but that's during like a French Revolution or something as well. And it's
it's in that era. They had loads of French horror, loads of horror coming out of France, which was really pushing boundaries. And Martyrs is all about like a cult who used torture to try and transcend human existence. And it goes to some real. I mean, I think there was an American remake. I never bothered watching it, because it goes to some really horrible, dangerous, dark places. So that's a cult movie, because not everyone should watch that, I don't think, because it would really upset quite a lot of people. So yeah, I think there's a few different definitions, really, and I think all the films that you've mentioned and we've been discussing fit into it in different realms. But I guess in all of those, you're right. The key factor would be you need to be interested in the medium in order to seek them out. I want to seek out this film that everyone talks about that I haven't seen, or I want to seek this film out that is meant to be so bad it's good, or I want to seek this film out that is really going to push my boundaries and make me see something in a new way. And that's something I like doing, like whether it be Martyrs or, it's funny, isn't it, how often it is horror. The Love Witch was a great movie from a couple of years ago, which is ostensibly horror but not really. But again, it's nothing I'd seen before, and at times was purposefully made to seem like it was badly made, but not like The Room. Like almost kind of like bad transitions, but done on purpose in order to tell its story. That's a really interesting movie. So yeah, sometimes it's about getting out of your comfort zone, I think, and trying something new.
And that's the end of part 1. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Part 2 will be out next week at the same sort of time, but as I said in the intro, if you cannot wait for that, or you just really want to support this show and appreciate how much work goes into it, go over to patreon.com/genuine chit-chat, and for as little as £1 a month, which is like $1.30 or something, you get access to hours and hours of additional content every month, including early access to any of these episodes I split into 2, so the full unsplit 2-hour-long episode is already on Patreon, and you get access to an RSS feed, so you can put that in the podcast app of your choice, and then you get access to all our Afterthoughts episodes as well that me and Megan do at least once a week, where we talk about either some new movies we've seen at the cinema, which are spoiler-free reviews, or we talk about TV series, or some, we did an X-Men rewatch, Megan never seen the X-Men film, so we did those, Spider-Man, lots of things that either are nerdy or just not nerdy stuff, films like Little Miss Sunshine and Knocked Up, 27 Dresses, that sort of thing, so it's quite a wide berth of stuff. If you want like a nice mini movie show that episodes are only about 10 to 15 minutes long generally each, with a few that are a bit longer than that, and you want to support the show, and you want early access to Genuine Chit-Chat episodes and a few other bits and pieces, then please consider checking out Genuine Chit-Chat on Patreon. So aside from that, guys, obviously the link's in the description to Jack's movie blog, which is really cool, as well as his Twitter, and, his other shows, which are on Comics in Motion, Seasons Greetings, Pop Gorillas, and his involvement in Indie Comic Spotlight. And he mentioned a video in this part, which was about how David Fincher hijacks your eyes. A link to that is in the description. I really recommend it. It's only like 5 minutes long, and it really will change how you view David Fincher films. It's really, really cool. It doesn't spoil any of his films either, so if you've only seen like 1 or 2 David Fincher films, like Seven or Fight Club or Gone Girl, please check this out. It is really, really cool. It blew me away because I watched it after me and Jack had this conversation. So aside from that, what have we got coming up? Well, the week after next, I've got a conversation planned with someone to do with Star Wars. I'm quite excited. They're not necessarily a creator of Star Wars content for the masses, but they are someone who creates Star Wars content in the similar way that I do. That's kind of your hint in some ways. I'm very excited to release that conversation, but obviously I haven't recorded it yet. So I hope it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't see why it wouldn't be, but we shall see in that regard. I've also got plans for other people in Comics in Motion to come on the show as well. I think myself and Rhea have been talking about it. Also soon to be coming out is the Comics in Motion Book Club, the second episode of that, where we talk about Art Spiegelman's Mouse. So when that comes out, I'll be sure to post that on social media and things as well, because that is a really, really interesting chat. And both Jack and Rhea are involved in that, as well as a couple of other people as well. Well, Tony Farina and Dave Horrocks, I don't need to say a couple of other people. And aside from that, guys, check out my Patreon, check out my Star Wars show. If you've never read a Star Wars comic in your life and you kind of want to get into the realm, or even if you have no interest in buying or reading the comics, but you want to find out some of the information that you've been missing out on, Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the feed of Comics in Motion or found on Genuine Chit-Chat's YouTube channel. It's perfect for anyone who's been reading all the Star Wars comics or none. I talk about the story and plot and things. I talk about it in enough detail so you understand the broad strokes of the plot and things, and I pick out certain elements of it that I think are quite interesting to talk about. And I also talk about the many, many connections, because as the Star Wars canon slowly gets wider and wider, there are so many connections to things. You read a comic and you see a character that seems familiar and you want to be like, oh, where have I seen them before? Rather than you have to look it up and spend all that time, I do all that for you, and often I give trivia information and little tidbits here and there as well. So if you already read the Star Wars comics and you want refreshers on ones you've already read, or you want to find out about some of the connections and stuff you may have missed, check out the show. If you're really into Star Wars but you don't really have the time, money, or interest to read all the Star Wars comics, check it out anyway, because there's certain characters I do things on, like Darth Maul, Kylo Ren, Count Dooku, lots of them, where I just go through the comics they've been involved with and that sort of thing. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you check out all of the episodes that Jack has been involved with in Comics in Motion, because it is a lot of fun. Make sure you tune in next week, support the show on Patreon, just do everything I'm telling you to do, and then become a mindless drone and just become part of the cult of Genuine Chit-Chat. I want to clarify, there's no cult of Genuine Chit-Chat. Not yet. But, that's really it from me, I think, guys. Otherwise, I'm going to be rambling on here for hours, and I'm very tired today. So, I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure you tune in next week. And also tweet at Jack. Tell him how much you enjoyed him coming on the show. It is at I am Jack's Musings. And as I said, link and the Twitter handle is in the description. But thank you, as always, for listening, guys. I appreciate each and every one of you, especially listening all the way up to the end. And I'll talk to you next week with part 2.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars comics and canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.